dear guests, colleagues, fellows and friends, and I'm glad to see you here at the last Tuesday lecture for this year as part of our lecture series 1944, now in 1945, the end of the war in East Central Europe. And this is a lecture series in cooperation with the Museum of the Second World War in Gdansk. And tomorrow our speaker will be in Gdansk and give his lecture there. It is a pleasure for me to welcome a proven specialist today who incidentally is not visiting us for the first time. It is Bastiaan Willems, and please allow me to share a few sentences about him. Bastiaan Willems is a lecturer in the history of war in the 20th century Europe at Lancaster University. His research examines different types of violence during the final year of the Third Reich and its immediate aftermath. He recently published Violence in Defeat, the Wehrmacht on German Soil, 1944-1945, and that was a publication after his PhD. And before Bastiaan completed his BA in the Netherlands and then his master at the University of Edinburgh and made his doctorate as well there. Later he was from 21 to 23 a visiting scholar at the chair of contemporary history in the Department of History at the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich, and he was founded by a fellowship from the British Leverhulme Trust. And in his research, which focuses on the history of National Socialism and the way the Federal Republic of Germany later dealt with the Third Reich, he was particularly interested in the crimes committed during the final phase of the war. His current research topic relates to perpetrators, victims, and bystanders of public executions in the last months of the Second World War. And now you may see East Prussia. What kind of region is that? Actually, it no longer exists today, but it was the first part of Germany where fighting between the Red Army and the Wehrmacht took place in 1944-45. And this is where an important final chapter of the Second World War began. And many details from the end were later no longer perceived or overlooked in retrospect. And in his research, Bastiaan Willems has once again taken a close look at the events of that time, and it is precisely this that makes his research so fascinating. But let's let him speak for himself. So, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. A lot of topics here that have been misunderstood. So what I'm going to do with you today is going to talk you through some of the questions that I have, continue to engage with as a goal for today's talk, to just get a little bit of a firmer grip on the chronology of the events in East Prussia, 1944, 1945, how I understand them, and particularly within that, exploring some of the underappreciated events of the East Prussian campaign of those months. This is the prior knowledge that I require you to have. I'd like to think it's as minimally as possible, and I also like to think we're here with people who are interested in the topic, so I hope that at least some of this is familiar to you. So what I want you to know is that in the summer of 1944, the Red Army reaches the borders of East Prussia. It's the first province to be reached when it breaks into the German Reich, which it does here in East Prussia. Incredibly grim treatment of the German civilian population, determined resistance by the Wehrmacht, and the beginning of the flight and expulsion of the province's population. I would say these are the things that whenever you start to learn a little bit about East Prussia, these are the first bullet points, if you will, that you are familiar with. So I figured let's just start there. So this is the only thing that I really hope that you already know or can understand. Before we continue with that, so what I want to do today is I'm just going to talk to you, quite frankly, month by month, right? But rather than just seeing this as purely chronological, every month has a question that I want to answer, has a bone of contention, if you will, that I feel I want to push back against a little bit. So even though it is presented month by month, it is also thematically, right? So let's start in July 1944. So it is at this point where I like to start the clock. This is when the German army retreats from Belorussia back onto East Prussian soil. Well, East Prussia is where it's truly getting on the radar for us. Why is that? Well, of course, the 20 July Polot Operation Valkyrie. This is at this very same place where the German army is retreating, right? And the German population sees those existing hand in hand, if you will. So the betrayal of Hitler on the one hand, and the fact that the German military is fighting in such a way that it falls back so quickly is seen as sort of like a cynical way in which the German Wehrmacht is just no longer fighting. So the German population as a whole sees that like hand in hand. How do they see that particularly in East Prussia? They see their army retreating. Like they remember sending them off in 1941. Very proudly, they send them off into Poland 1949, into the Soviet Union 1941. And here you have that, let's say, perfect German soldier that you're sending off. Well, who is coming back 3 years later is a very different soldier, of course. This is a soldier that has been through the ringer, if you say in English, right? It's been a soldier that has participated in acts of genocide, for example, has been brutalized by years of war. It's a very, very different soldier, right? So this soldier has, on his way back, carried out scorched earth policies, for example, has been living off the land as a result. And my first point of departure, so this is where I focused on my research, is my question was, can you just, like that radicalized mindset, can you just take that off the moment that you fall back on German soil, right? I found that the answer is very much no, right? As opposed to what the German military very often says about the final year of the war. If you see any historiography, pick up any book, if you will, on the Second World War, you see it's the Eastern Front 1941 to 1944 on the one hand, and Germany 1944-1945. These are very distinct literary canons that you see. And I'm saying, like, well, wait a minute, they are right next to each other. One day they're on the Eastern Front, so to speak. At the second day, they are in Germany. Like, these are the same units, these are the same ideological underpinnings that they have. These are the same troops that you have in front of you. It's the same racisms that you bring back with you mentally. Let's all keep that in mind, right? So what you're seeing happening in East Prussia is that also you see also here that the German army continues on occasion to live off the land. It continues to requisition like cattle, takes a very loose attitude towards what you can take from farmers. So you see a lot of outrage. And this all comes back to Erich Koch, the Gauleiter, for example, or Joseph Goebbels, where the East Prussian population writes letter after letter complaining about their military, saying like, what is happening to like these men? Like these are, these are radicalized. So very often we see also documents indicating that they have to be reminded that they're now back on German territory. Like these, keep in mind, you are here in Germany again. Right? They have to be reminded of that. And so this is a narrative that is very much forgotten. Like the German army after the Second World War, this narrative is no longer there because the German army can really only be the staunch defender of Germany. So that is just something that civilians don't really talk about anymore, like especially like ex-police, they don't talk about this sort of things anymore. I have here Oberstleutnant Hans Otto Erdmann, more as a homage. He's one of the very few men involved actually in the 20th July plot, but is incredibly like unsuccessful precisely because he's operating in quite the vacuum. The Wehrmacht, as we hopefully all know, is still very much on board with Nazi Germany's racist agenda. So then let's look at their adversary, at their enemy. Also here I'm on familiar territory, I would say, with most of you. You have a Red Army that is under a lot of pressure here. So like you have language barriers. These are from all over Europe and Asia. So these are from Kalmykia until like the Far East, like you name it. Massive destruction that they're faced with, huge manpower issues, large turnover. So you really don't really know who the man in your foxhole next to you is, so to speak. They are also very much like persecuting their own. So here you have a lot of soldiers, and you see this on the German side as well, for that matter, where it can very much exist that on the one hand, you, or your family, or your people even, is being persecuted, while at the same time you're expected to talk. Well, there's no man to me that symbolizes that better as the man that you see over here, Major General Bastiaan. He is a Kalmuk. So his division is the first one, the very, very first one to break into East Prussia. So it is his division, a Kalmukian, commanded by a Kalmukian commander, that is the first to break into East Prussia, into Germany, as a matter of fact. So this is already in August 1944. So we tend to focus on October when there's the big push. But as a matter of fact, the first person to set quite literally a foot into East Prussia, they are part of a division that is under his command. So now I also want to look at the Red Army soldier with some, let's say, sympathy at the very least. We are very keen, of course, to look at their criminal behavior, and I'm not saying this didn't happen, of course, but we should also not forget that this doesn't come out of nowhere, right? This is a person, and this not just him, but any given Red Army soldier who has almost uniformly suffered on a personal level, right? Almost all of them have suffered personal loss of loved ones, or have seen their property destroyed, especially traumatic if they are making their way through Belarusia. Here the Germans have, in their retreat, destroyed incredible amounts of territory, like scorched earth policy, and that gets capped off by the discovery of Majdanek. You have Alexander Werth, the BBC and Times journalist, quite famously saying, it is with the smell of Majdanek in their noses that the Red Army soldier would enter East Prussia, right? So they are very, very aware of that. So it's something that I feel that we should consider. And just as a note here, we really are very committed, I would say, determined in the post-war era, during the Cold War era, of course, to look at the Red Army soldier as a very one-dimensional fighter, if you will. We should keep in mind, if you're looking at the, let's say, civilizing process that is taking place within the Soviet Union in the 1920s and the 1930s, that they are actually making great, great strides. And they probably would have continued, maybe not in the way that we in the democratic West would have preferred, but they are tackling major issues when it comes to literacy, when it comes to cleanliness and that sort of thing. All of that is stopped dead in its tracks by the arrival of the war, of course, right? Just something to consider here. Now, then moving into August and September 1944, this can very rightly be considered like the watershed month of the Second World War as far as the East Prussians are concerned. East Prussia, very, very deep in the east, like the easternmost province, of course. So what does this mean? It remains out of touch, if you will, from the out of reach of the Royal Air Force. Cannot reach it, quite frankly, up till August 1944, when there is this possibility, right? The Royal Air Force bombs Königsberg, does that twice in the course of a week in late August 1944. It is here that you see mentalities changing, not only in Königsberg, but for example also in Rastenburg, in the Wolfschanze, for example, because what is happening also in September, when it comes to things from the air, we have like Arnhem in the Netherlands. This actually makes Hitler pretty afraid that, you know, you might have just a determined unit, determined division landing on the Wolfschanze, for example. So all of a sudden, you know, like fear is coming from the air, it is coming from the ground. It's a very, very different province all of a sudden, right? What you also see, like here you have the destroyed city. The first people are now being evacuated out of the city. So the city also changes in how it sees itself, and the people in the city change how they see themselves as a result. It is here that most memoirs start, I would say. This is also why I wanted to start it like 1.5 months to 2 months earlier, because it is the beginning of a victim narrative. Any memoirs of East Prussians dealing with the years 1939 to 1944, like summer of 1944, they're incredibly, incredibly scarce. Like this is where they all start. Like not in 1941, 1942 or wherever, almost non-existent, like in that respect, unless it is like the exceptions, I should say, that we have are from, for example, Jews such as Michael Wieck, who does start earlier because, you know, like he subscribes to a very, very different narrative than the people around him. Now, then October rolls around. Like this is for the first time that we are seeing active fighting in East Prussia. So we have two fronts. The first Baltic front, which is advancing just north of East Prussia through Lithuania, heading towards Memel, so today Klaipėda, and then the third Belarusian front, who is trying to attack just south of that and attacks into Memel. Now, this is an ultimately unsuccessful operation, not enough time to plan it, not enough forces to plan it. Also stands out because on the German side it is the first deployment of the Volkssturm, but how this operation particularly becomes known is because of the discovery of the quote-unquote Nemmersdorf massacre. Right? This is where German soldiers find proof of German civilians being massacred by the Red Army. I have focused a lot of my research on seeing if there's something that can be gained. I have found 3 new sources that I can bring to the fore. One of these I can like present here. What I think important about that is because immediately these numbers get dramatically inflated, and this is something that we know Goebbels does very, very willingly, very, very quickly. But what we see is that the Wehrmacht, rather than the party itself, what we might think, is actually the driving force behind that. So I have now like the memoir of the commanding officer of this, like of the defenders, Reinhard. I have him now at Nemmersdorf within a day. So he's there, like very quickly he's there, and he reflects on it. I have also found a memoir of a propagandist of the Kurt Eggers, also an unknown account who also managed to fill in quite some blanks. And then interestingly, this is a source that I found in Q, where we actually have the SS cautioning against pushing this narrative too hard. So here you have the SS saying, like, the question of the atrocities committed by the Bolsheviks in the area of East Prussia, occupied by them, is not to be gone into at present, so as to avoid any atmosphere of panic among the population. Right? So I've looked at the language that is being used. And once again, very quickly, we just look immediately to Goebbels and we say, look at this hateful campaign. And, you know, like once again, I very much find myself in agreement there. But one important note that I want to make here is that if you look at the language that is being used here, it's actually much more reminiscent of what you see already being completely common among the ranks of the military, like of the German military. Like this is the language that you already see in propaganda leaflets, in divisional newspapers, that deeply challenging language, deeply racist language that you see here. And we now also know this, like this doesn't really resonate with the German population at all. Like a lot of people are deeply, deeply fearful after seeing images like this. Like, does this mean that our own army is incapable of defending us? Like, why are we not being evacuated from an area that is very clearly on the line of an attack here, right? So during the war, you see that a lot of people are actually pushing back with this, or actually more afraid of this, right? Now, why does this narrative nevertheless come to dominate this? Because it's being very actively pushed by the military, who plays a much, much larger role in the final year of the war than we like to give it credit for. So after the war, what we see is that this narrative is readopted, if you will, especially among expellee organizations who say, like, yeah, like they are now using this as proof of the Soviet bestiality, so on and so forth. But at the time, they were actually much more like reserved and actually quite afraid if you see something like this. I try to keep the picture sort of civilized with one dead person. Like perhaps some of you know the footage that is tied to this. You see just rows of people lying in very like compromising, unflattering positions and so on. Yeah, this would not necessarily give me solace either. So then November, December, just what I think is important here, this is what I'm trying to do, to flesh out, is the idea that war of worldviews continues. So what we see in the German military memoirs that emerged, they say, yeah, maybe like in the Soviet Union, we were under marching orders of Hitler, so on and so forth. Like we were sticking our toes into some genocidal behavior, maybe, right? In Germany itself, we didn't do that, right? Now, beyond the fact that we now, of course, know that they were fully complicit on the Eastern Front, right? Like 20, 30 years of research has completely dismantled that notion when it comes to the Eastern Front. But it is quite persistent in Germany itself. And here I'm saying, like, once again, it's like, what has really changed? Like, it's still the same soldiers. It is still the same propaganda that you're subjected to. You still have your same enemy in front of you. Like, the fact that you no longer have like a Soviet village in your grasp doesn't mean that you are less racist, right? So this is where I've been looking at like discontinuities in racism. And here we have found it, for example, in like the different sub-camps that you have of Stutthof, where conditions are still absolutely appalling. These Stutthof sub-camps, even though we think about them as SS sub-camps, these are Luftwaffe sub-camps, right? They are operated by the Luftwaffe. They are operated for the Luftwaffe. We know that Dönitz himself requests workers, like forced laborers, to be sent to support the construction of ships in East Prussia. We have units searching for like runaway forced laborers, for example, German units doing that, or operating together with the SS to make sure that parachuted spies, for example, don't make it in. We have the commander of Einsatzgruppe also falling back on East Prussian soil. So they are all there, and they are still very much in a very close connection with each other. Like these bonds that they have forged abroad, they still continue to exist, right? They cannot act on them as much as they would have done abroad, but this is not to say that they are fundamentally changing how they consider their warfare, right? So you still have this deep suspicion of fifth columnists. You see all these things, like all taken together, this war of worldviews, which we tend to sort of like close in mid-1944 once the German army retreats back. I'm saying like, no, like this continues. You know, the fact that you cannot be as successful as you were doesn't mean that it's not happening anymore, right? Now, then we move into January 1945. This is, once again, we're touching on a more familiar chapter, if you will. This is the start of the East Prussian offensive itself. Once again, the 3rd Belarusian Front is asked to carry out that operation. It's quite frankly the exact same operation that is asked to carry out in October. Now it has more forces at its disposal. Certainly it is better prepared, better trained, so on. But on the other hand, over the last months, a massive series of defensive positions have been dug, both by the military, but especially by the civilian population, which is brought in by the hundreds of thousands. And once again, we see very, very large numbers of Poles and Lithuanians also called in to dig those defensive positions. So whereas you see in German propaganda, oh, it's the German population that is going to help their military to dig these defensive positions, very often, like well over 50%, I believe, I have to check the numbers, but I believe it's well over 50%. It's actually Poles and Lithuanians doing a lot of the digging, especially once like the summer is over and we go into autumn, where like this weather is just absolutely appalling. And we see that it is like the Poles, for example, doing a lot of this work. So here I also want to talk very briefly about the concept of strategy. It's, you know, it can be a little bit dry, but important here is that I truly believe that at this point Hitler has not given up the idea of winning the war, nor the German military. This is something which I fundamentally disagree with many of the memoirs and many historians who have taken that over. It's the idea that the German army just sort of like sits and take it until nothing of it remains. Like they know as of, let's say, 1944 that they are not going to win anymore, and then just sit it and take a punch until it is May 1945. It's the, like sometimes referred to as this strategy of self-destruction. This to me, this is hogwash. This is, you know, like no army in the world does that to itself. Like no, like you are still operating on a winning formula, right? Or at least you try to come up with some sort of winning formula. Now, where does the German high command see that, and like Hitler himself too? It is in the so-called fortress strategy. Like this is their idea of winning the war. Now, the fortress strategy is implemented first on the Eastern Front in the Soviet Union. So a series of fortresses there is established. These are wildly unsuccessful. They are all within days, often, of a Soviet army starting its attack. They are rolled over, and tens of thousands of Germans go into captivity as a result. So you're talking about Vitebsk, for example, Bobruisk. These sort of towns, they hold out for a few days. Absolutely not worth the manpower needed for that at all. So here we have Guderian, Heinz Guderian, chief of the OKH, of the German High Command, if you will, who says, okay, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to have a fortress strategy, and how might that look in this phase of the war? He manages to convince Hitler that fortresses are going to be much, much further behind the front line. He says, we're going to give up some territory, right? Hitler very much opposed to that idea, but he manages to convince Hitler that this is in fact necessary. And it actually works like a charm, because what happens is that rather than immediately hitting a fort or like a fortress, a Festung, the moment that you attack as the Red Army, like now you are punching in nothing for a while before you hit the fortress, which also means that a lot of your troops have already been deployed. The German army sees you coming. A lot of the tanks might already been knocked out, so on and so forth. So that is one element of it. Now also what happened in fortresses in the Soviet Union is that these could not be properly manned. You don't have any like reserve units for this, so on. Here we have, in this case, the Volkssturm, for example, who you can put as a temporary garrison, at least, as this first so-called security garrison. Now, a security garrison is never meant to hold out for a long amount of time. And Guderian and both Hitler, like, they realized that, like, no. But what you can do is you can put them in those forts that ring all these old German, former Prussian cities very often. So like Königsberg has a ring of fortresses around it. Posen has a ring of fortresses around it. Like a great many, like Lützen has a ring of these forts around it. So if we put them there, they can hold out maybe for a few days at the very least. Like they're not expected to hold out for weeks on end, months on end or anything like this, but for a few days, yes, right? What can you do in those few days? Now we can allocate like sources to it. So, you know, we can gradually fall back with our regular sources, and then we can tie them to a fortress. So this is precisely what's happening in Königsberg. This is precisely what is happening in Posen. This is precisely what is happening in Breslau, so on and so forth. So as a result, Königsberg holds. Like against all odds, if you will, Königsberg holds and becomes a besieged fortress. It eventually is besieged for 2 months, so you have a besieged German city for 2 months. And it holds as a result. So this is also why Hitler absolutely flies into a full rage when he hears that Lützen falls. Like Lützen is supposed to have a very similar role to Königsberg. As a matter of fact, is considered actually more important than Königsberg. It's like in the heart of the province, surrounded by lakes, perfectly placed for precisely that sort of defense, and is given up by Reinhardt and Hossbach, two most senior commanders there. After the war, Hossbach says, I was sacked. Reinhardt says the same. I was sacked because we were retreating from East Prussia. We're trying to power through a Soviet pincer. This is not the case. They are sacked because they have Lützen fall without a fight. If you, once again, like what they do pretty cleverly, in a way, is they hide behind like a very muddied timeline. You could very well believe, if you don't look at it carefully, that this is the reason that they're being sacked, because they are attacking a Soviet pincer trying to break out west. But once again, if you line up the timeline, you see that Hitler and Guderian are actually so angry because Lützen falls. So it's that fortress strategy that actually is incredibly, incredibly prominent. And if you see how in late January 1945, once the Soviet offensives run out of steam, you see where that front line comes to a halt. It is precisely along this line of fortresses. Now, eventually, they are going to power through, of course, but this is always going to happen. Like the manpower of the Red Army is just far superior. They're better trained. Quite frankly, they are beating them at every given metric that you have. I should, by the way, stress that it is not at all that statistic that you very often hear, like, oh, it's 12-1 in guns or that sort of stuff. Like that all comes from men like Guderian. It is a majority, but not the big majority that you might think, or what we learn when it comes to the German defensive operations. It's quite frankly that the Red Army at this point is just a lot better at fighting, has really learned to fight over the last years. Now, then, as part of what I really want to do is to look at individuals. I think it's incredibly, incredibly important. So the last time that I was here, like as Professor Lazarevic already alluded to, we had a conference on the death marches, particularly on the death march to Pomniken. This we should put front and center in our thinking of East Prussia in 1944, 1945. If there's ever any proof that you say, like this war of worldviews continues, like this is it. So what I've done in my research is to look at the ways in which German commanders, like military commanders, are in contact with the SS to facilitate that march. This march cannot take place without German commanders being fully aware of the fact that this is in fact happening. And we now also know without a hint of a doubt that march is taking place with full awareness of the German commanders. They don't want emaciated Jews in their city. They are not necessary as a workforce anymore. This is normally what you would use Jews for. This is what they have been used for over the last half years. They have a large enough manpower pool. You have a lot of still, let's say, rather sturdy Poles or Russians, for example, so you don't need this workforce. You also don't want to have the proverbial hot potato, if you will. You don't want, like if this city is going to be captured by the Red Army, you don't want to have exhibit number one, as in, like here are like 6,500 emaciated Jews, right? You don't want that, right? So, they're being shipped out of the city, and as I hope all of you know, out of the 6,500, like a few dozen, like Wood will probably know the exact numbers here, remain. An absolute, like percentage-wise, probably the most deadly death march of them all. What I want to do, looking at the siege of Königsberg, is not just looking at it from a military perspective. Like, I'm much more interested in, for example, someone like Hans-Burkhard Zumowski. Like, he's this young boy, and he talks about it, like in a way, it's like, like what is happening here, or like elderly people who are in the city. So you have fortress service, as it is known, which its commander, General Otto Lasch, together with its Kreisleiter, Ernst Wagner, like proclaim for 4 hours a day and they say, quote, everyone in the fortress. What they mean with everyone is precisely that everyone. The only people that they single out are young mothers and pregnant women. Like, these are the only ones that are not participating. So you have here Zumowski, for example, who first uses his sled to go tobogganing, and then the German soldiers say, like, oh, how about you haul some grenades from point A to point B? Like, that would be a way to help us. Or pass messages from point A to point B. And of course, you're a small kid. You think this is the greatest thing ever, right? You get to help soldiers, right? He was already super jealous of all these Hitler youths who are at 14 years old, like get to practice with like Panzerfaust, like anti-tank weapons. So like he's already, he's green with envy, if you will. And now he gets to participate. So like for a boy like this is hugely exciting, for example. And, soldiers know that he's fully disposable, right? Any little boy that you can have do something like this is one soldier that you not have to send through a trench, for example. So that is something that I'd like to reconstruct. Festung Königsberg becomes known as the Festung der Greise, so the fortress of the elderly. Quite literally, like everyone has gray hair if you're serving there, like if you're in the city. Then I've been looking at the like food, for example. So, like one of the main things when it comes to like civilian concerns is like how much you can take care of food, for example. The food actually stays up relatively well. A lot of refugees have arrived in Königsberg, normally with a little bit of food on them, so this can supplement like food a little bit. Then also like the German High Command like starts looking for ways to get food. I have found sources of a butcher where is on display elephant foot. Like we know that these 3 elephants that you see over here are shot and used for food. Same with antelopes. So particularly like Mary, which is the one on the left here, I find like as far as Total War goes most interesting because she's in 1941 brought over from Kiev Zoo as a war booty. like then brought to Königsberg, where she is eventually going to be eaten, right? So, you know, like you can really get to a very like personal level here. And I think that is very often like obfuscated by these very standard narratives of like the military, which says like we did this, we like defended this, attacked that, so on and so forth. So all of these things I very much like to introduce into the narrative of Königsberg to come up with a much more complete idea of how we're looking at it all. When you're talking about East Prussia, at the very heart of it, of course, should lie the evacuation of the East Prussian population, starting with like seaborne evacuation. Here I just want to stress, very often you will see the name Operation Hannibal. It's one of those famous operations. I just want to stress here, that does not exist. Right? There is no Operation Hannibal. This is not to say that there's not huge numbers of ships being used to evacuate German civilians, but it is on a much more ad hoc nature than we like to think it. There is no stuff that is organizing like an Operation Hannibal. Hannibal is one simple order. It also really does not pop up in any historiography up to the 1980s until this is misconstrued by a nonetheless accomplished like amateur historian, Heinz Schön, who was himself on the Wilhelm Gustloff. He has done like a formidable job, has, I want to say, more or less accidentally introduced Operation Hannibal because he didn't quite understand what was happening there, and now it's really taken flight, like on like both like the German far right, like it's a term that is very often used. You see that East Prussian expellee organizations have latched onto it. Because the idea that your army is there to help you, or in this case your navy is there to help you, is a very soothing thought, of course, right? But the reality is, like the navy is not thinking about you at this point. It's still thinking about supplying troops, for example. Had there been a Operation Hannibal or any meaningful operation in this sense, it would have started months earlier, but we don't see that at all. So also, just keep in mind, like for all these very large numbers of ships that are there to support fleeing refugees, we should keep in mind that all these ships are bottled up there not because they want to help, but because they've been steadily pushed out of every other sea and ocean. Like of course they are not going to be in the Atlantic anymore. They have lost all dominance in the Atlantic. They are just, quite frankly, cooped up in the Baltic Sea. Yes, of course you're going to find an awful lot of ships in the Baltic Sea because they cannot be anywhere else anymore in 1945, right? So what I also think quite problematic about that is the fact that with all that attention that we pay to the military extending that helping hand, like once again, the narrative of the very many like brave women, for example, who shepherded their families out, very often with the help of French like prisoners of war, for example. I think these should get much more attention. There are absolutely harrowing stories that are out there. They have to go over the Friese Haff. Some of us might have some awareness of that, but let's say like popularly, this is a part of it that really tends to fly under the radar. So like the people who know that might be the people in expellee organizations and historians, but that about sums it up. Like whereas we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who suffered absolutely horrible plights, and I think it would make much more sense if we address these groups of people in much more earnest. Now, also, if you are starting to reconstruct that narrative, and we will turn to a image so that you have it a little bit clearer in mind here, is if you ever go to Stutthof, I don't know, some of you presumably will have been there, and you place this along the line where the Friesche Neerung is, like the Vistula Spit, right? It is right at the end of this Vistula Spit, right? And then this entire area is very flat, right? So one of the first places of shelter that you're going to find there is actually Stutthof concentration camp. A lot of people are passing through a fully operational concentration camp because, as we perhaps also know, Stutthof remains fully operational until the very, very last days of the war. Like months after Auschwitz, Stutthof is still fully operational, right? Something I think very important to consider, do we find Stutthof in the memoirs of expellees? No. Like they very, like understandably, but incorrectly, of course, omit that chapter of their flight. Like that one day or that few days that they were there, these are not going to show up in the memoirs because this would compromise their own victim narrative. Like their victim narrative, they don't want to share that with Jews, right? So once again, we can place Stutthof like that. There's that absolute fully racist element of the Nazi warfare, of the Nazi mission, like at the heart of this all, and I think we should do that. Doesn't necessarily need to take away from the plight of the German population at all, but it should be incorporated into the larger picture of East Prussia 1944-1945. Now, then, moving to February 1945, Operation Westwind. Here we have Königsberg as it is besieged up till February, so they can get out right here through the sea, and then there are German forces here on the tip of the Samland. They want to break through and re-establish the connection. This is actually a wildly successful operation, actually. I would say one of the most successful counter-offensives in the final year of the war. Like you will not find as successful counter-offensive as this war. Now, once again, you see that after the war, German commanders make an awful lot out of this. It's like the reason that we re-established that corridor between Königsberg on the one hand and Pilau on the other is because from Pilau, the civilian population can flee out of Königsberg. Out of East Prussia, out of Königsberg into Pilau and beyond. I have found no evidence at all of any contemporary source that even hints at civilians. Like it does not factor in. Like the fact that it might happen is something that they presumably will have thought about. It's just not at all a concern when planning this operation at all. What I did find evidence of is, it can only be construed as the exact opposite. And that is where you see a lot of civilians from Königsberg being, quite frankly, unceremoniously dumped outside of Königsberg, out of sight, out of mind. So, for example, here in Peise, which you see there in the bottom, so like right over here, we have a very large refugee camp. Might be as many as 20,000 people, but this is very hard to actually pinpoint to actual numbers, where a lot of hunger, a lot of typhoid, I should say, not typhus, typhoid is breaking out, for example, so much so that these people go on a hunger march back to Königsberg. And Otto Lasch sees them coming. Like it's one of the very few times that you see him engaging in his memoirs with German civilians, where they say they come to wringing their hands, asking if we could return to Königsberg, right? Well, if, as the military and as the party, you've created a situation where going back into a city that is about to be attacked by the army, like by the Red Army, appears to be a safer choice than staying behind. Like you have created a horrible, horrible situation, right? So I think, once again, very important to keep in mind. Now, what you're also seeing here is the discovery of another massacre, the Mettgeten massacre. That I would say is actually quite substantial in size. I would say certainly bigger than Gumbinnen, but in the post-war perception of East Prussia, much, much smaller. You see here that a lot of civilians have been taken from the city, from surrounding villages, are brought to Mettgeten and executed. These are pretty atrocious. But we also see that this is a very carefully guarded narrative that is being presented. So very clearly they have learned a little bit from Nemmersdorf, because this information is not immediately distributed. They sit on it actually for a few days, like 3-4 days. They decided to not advertise this until, I believe, the 25th. So that's discovered on the 19th of February. Only on the 25th does this narrative break. It is being very widely advertised, like brochures are being printed, and so on and so forth. But they sit on it. They want to come up with a narrative that works for everyone, so a little bit more cognizant of it all. But once again, a lot of civilians are deeply scared by this sort of language nonetheless. Good, then we move south a little bit. So on the map, we have Pilau over here. Königsberg is right over here. Here you have the 4th Army, which used to be commanded by Hosbach. It's now commanded by Müller, General Müller. The name as bog standard as you can possibly hope. In his ideology, also pretty bog standard commander. The only task that he really has is to stay put. So you don't have to be a good commander. As a matter of fact, he isn't. This is recognized very, very early on. Guderian knows that he's not a good commander. He knows he's not a good commander. But that's not important, because the only thing that you have to do is stay put, right? Why do you stay put here? It is to make sure that you can get civilians out. So also a lot of civilians are here. Now, whether these are the concerns of the German Army High Command, once again, I don't know, but it is unmistakable that the German soldiers who are defending this area, they do at the very least feel that they are defending it to make sure that German civilians are getting out. So it is here where you see that they go from Rosenberg or Balga, that they cross over to what you see over there, Normeln, and then from there the Frisian spit down to Danzig through Stutthof. Here, once again, I'd just like to remind you that someone like Großadmiral Dönitz, for all that narrative that exists about, its ships that are being evacuated, I very much prefer to pay a lot more attention to this area, because, it's really only on the 8th of May that Großadmiral Dönitz really comes down to this civilian issues as carry out transports of German people with the greatest possible speed. And then I'm thinking, you're pretty late to the party if this is something that starts to dawn on you quite literally when you already signed on the dotted line for your surrender. It's a little bit late, but a lot has been made of this quote where we see this is where Großadmiral Dönitz really steps up for us, and for reasons that are historically unimportant, I would say, no East Prussian civilian makes much of it. It makes perfect sense from a memory culture point of view, of course, but from a historical point of view, this is, indefensible in a way. Also, what doesn't really line up with that too well is that already in early March, all civilians have left this area, and even nonetheless, the fighting continues here for a few more weeks. So had it really been all about civilians, this would have looked probably a little bit different. We also know that the army that is here does not get the permission, for example, to fight its way to Königsberg. Could have done that, or made its way after those civilians to Normeln and then to Danzig, for example. Doesn't do that either. So there's a lot of that narrative that is a very, very false narrative. And once again, that is something that I hope to address. Then March 1945, preparations for the final storming. Everyone knows that storming is coming. One question that I actually have, and I've still not managed to answer fully, is why the Soviets even decide to storm it. It sounds maybe very basic in a way, but why not just continue to besiege it? They are going to storm it in April 9. If you wait for a month, it doesn't cost you any manpower, And you can just sit around it, which is quite frankly what they do a little bit further north at Koerland. I don't know why they storm it. That is actually one of the biggest open questions that I still have. But what we see on the German side, at the very least, it's very clear who is allowed to leave and who has to stay. A lot of German civilians are forced to stay. Like, you can still be of added value to the defense, you are staying. But you also see, like, Volkssturm men are in any case not allowed to leave, which means that also a lot of families decide to stay with that Volkssturm man. It's like, I'm not going to leave my father behind or my husband behind, I'm staying too, right? So very, very large people, like large numbers of people actually remain in the city, even though this corridor is now open and they would have the possibility, theoretically at least, to get out. You see that as a result, also, like, people are being trained with a Panzerfaust. A lot of calls to the to the last bullet with those Panzerfaust, by the way. Like, this is a mighty, mighty weapon. It's an anti-tank gun, basically, with a massive flame shooting out of its back. Which also means that a lot of people who practice with them, especially if you're a civilian, if you're standing too close behind it, you're going to get injured, you're going to die. So we have actually quite a lot of accounts from police officers who have to write a report after they've died. Like, as you see here, Erich Koch, who is, by the way, mislabeled, he's just called Erich. For some reason, this is not copy edited very well by the newspaper where this was printed. Yes, he's giving out knives, apparently everything for Germany. This is a quite standard Sturmabteilung knife, so apparently they must have found some sort of warehouse full with some knives, and this is turned into a propaganda opportunity. Wouldn't make too much out of it, but I nevertheless find it very, very interesting that, like, this is the information that makes it out of the city. Now, on the Soviet side, you see that, like, this replenishment and, like, a change of commanders. Chernakovsky, Ivan Chernakovsky, the commander of the 3rd Belarusian Front, he dies outside of Königsberg, the highest-ranking commander of the Red Army to die during the Second World War. A few days before, he's actually promoted to full field marshal, as a matter of fact. He already has the epaulets for a hit. He puts them on his uniform and already drives around with him. His wife says, "Don't do that, that's bad luck. You should not do that before you have your official appointment." Like, Chernakovsky, as a good Bolshevik, says, "I don't believe in superstition, like that is something of the old days. So I can absolutely do that." And it is targeted by the German artillery, who quite literally just only uses 2 shells. That's it. So it's not even like a full shelling, just toot, and he's gone. Replaced by Vasilevsky, like one of the most distinguished Red Army commanders there is. Intense training for urban warfare. So you see that the Soviets, they built a maquette which is roughly the size of all these red tables, where they built all of Königsberg at small level. They have an architect being brought in who actually feels a little bit conflicted about it, because you have to rebuild Königsberg, like, you have to build Königsberg out as a city, but the only purpose that your beautiful work as an architect has is to see it destroyed. So, like, he's very conflicted about it, in fact. You also see that these massive maps are created. Like, this, unfortunately, is a very, very vague picture. Like, this is a still from a Red Army propaganda movie from the time. You can just discern Königsberg just here in the top left corner, if you see this footage. So these are all parts of of a plane that is flying over, like planchette, photo planchette, they call it in Russian. And they stick them together, and you get yourself a very good image of what it is. So you know precisely where every pillbox, every machine gun, and so on is. So, like, the Soviets are really very properly preparing for this attack, create specific units to deal with attack. Then, moving to the storming itself, here, for me, is really where the post-war narrative of German generals completely falls apart. If you are claiming that you are defending Königsberg for the safety of the East Prussian population, for the civilians of Königsberg, right? You should heed to calls for surrender, or at least open negotiation of sorts. You have the party, curiously enough, that start pressing for the idea of an open city. So you have Kreisleiter Wagner, who says, should we maybe not consider making Königsberg an open city? Like, we know it's coming, everyone says it's coming, brochures are being thrown out over the city. It is Easter at this time, so Easter falls on the 1st of April, April Fool's Day. Everyone is very, very much aware that that is the case. Like, this is all like a sick joke, if you will. Like the Soviet commanders very much like tie into that narrative, like use that in their like pamphlets and so on. Everyone knows that it is coming. But what is happening is like the very last train to leave from Königsberg is actually filled with 10,000 slightly wounded soldiers in the morning of the 6th of April, the day of the start of the storming, and not, as one might expect or hope, like from a humanitarian perspective, civilians. If you look at this is the surrender document. What I find incredibly interesting about it, so this is by Lasch and his chief of staff, Susskind Schwendi. If you were to read this list, there are no civilians in this. As a matter of fact, the first 3 points are just what officers can do or cannot do. And Lasch is going to complain about it a lot. In his second memoir, he will, because he writes two, he writes one about the siege of Königsberg, and then one of his years immediately thereafter. Even in the 50s, in the late 1950s, he cannot let it go. The fact that his bag is stolen from him, he's going to write letters to Wasiewski himself, complaining about it. This is what is on his mind. And also very clear, it's the first thing, or well, in this case, the third thing on the list. I want to bring a kit. I want to have an orderly. Absolutely insane. Is this, but this is what is on this man's mind on the 10th, on the 9th of April. This is what they have, not the civilian population at all. Also here, by the way, I'm moving back the final date of surrender a few hours. It's on the 10th of April, on 1:30 in the morning, and not the 9th of April, as it is very rightly reported. Also, you see, this is also not a surrender document. This is just, this is not an unconditional surrender at all. Lasch is going to be blamed, by Hitler for surrendering Königsberg. So, you gave up Königsberg, and he's sentenced to death in absentia. Lasch, after the war, makes a big deal out of this. I have been sentenced to death by Hitler. By that very nature, I must have been against the regime. Right? It's great. I mean, if you're sentenced to that by Hitler, you must be one of the good guys, right? So, he makes a complete song and dance out of this. But if you look at this document, it's not even a unconditional surrender. He still says, if you see, point 9, eliminating remaining strongholds is still the task of the Russian army. Is well, I cannot reach them by radio anymore. It sounds more like a you problem. He remains completely adamant that he's not going to surrender up till the very end. So he surrenders eventually when the Russians are, or the Red Army are quite literally on the square where his command post is. Really only thinking about himself. And that's it. Then, May 1945, just the final defense. Once again, if you see where that final defense is taking place, sorry that the light is hitting a little bit curiously here, but if you have Gdansk here, but also Stutthof just appears on the map already here. Here, of course, it pops up on the map as the village, not as the concentration camp, of course. But yeah, you see, everyone is absolutely crammed in this tiny, tiny space. It is impossible for a soldier of the 170th Division or the 7th Division that you see here to not at least have some familiarity with it. Once again, does not show up in any of those divisional, post-war, accounts that you see, completely absent, in that, in that narrative. Right. So this is the situation quite frankly, as you have it by the time that Germany surrenders in like between 7 and 9 May 1945. For the East Prussians, it is of course not a liberation at all, and this is something that I think, like especially in Poland, this is widely recognized. It's just the arrival of the Red Army. There is no happiness that the Nazi regime is over. They very much feel that they are now occupied rather than anything else. So to the East Prussians, you see that this is very often the beginning of their suffering. Right? This is not the end of the war. Like, this is where actually their suffering ticks up. And looking purely at numbers, I would say they are like not too far off the mark. You see actually that casualty numbers really are very, very high in the months to come. What I want to stress is that is not just out of sheer cynicism of the Red Army. It is precisely because this area has been fought over at this point for 9 months, like longer than any other German province, right? Longer than any other area. So in any given village in the West, like, it's going to be fought over for a day maybe, like sometimes hours, right? And that's it. Like, East Prussia is fought over for 9 months, right? Yes, like if you have a slow creeping retreat for 9 months, like this is going to lay waste to your province, right? So here I really want to tie the war itself to this post-war era, and it's not just cynicism on account of the Red Army. You see that the Germans, for example, the German like military has sometimes even like taking the pipes, like the foundations, out of the farms. Like, if you have a good irrigation system, that should absolutely not fall into the hands of the advancing Red Army, right? You have like the famous slogan, "Everything is going to fall hands of the Ivan anyway." So like, why keep anything, right? If you can just, like if I can have even a little bit of like food or whatever, why would I keep it? Why would I keep like a pig alive, right? Why, like anything, right? So in their retreat, like, the German army has really eaten the country bare, very much as they've been doing in those months before. It's absolutely, as far as they see it, is a continuity. So like then the more familiar narrative that I hope we are all like familiar with is like what is then befalling the East Prussian population is, of course, like absolutely horrible and inexcusable. So I hope we all know that, even though I devoted attention to it in the beginning, like, this is not me trying to excuse what is happening to German women at all, or that the Red Army should be allowed to do that in any way. But yeah, it's important to keep in mind that this is all part of something much bigger. This is, of course, a deeply controversial topic, and is in need of great nuance. And I don't think I can convey this to you in the scope of a few minutes. So I'll leave that there for the time being. Then, June 1945 and beyond, there are some important questions here that we will have to ask. So the work, as I am envisioning it, is not ending in May 1945. It's going into the autumn of 1945, where even though you see that the Germans are like stressing that their post-war hardships are caused by the Red Army, like, as I said, it's really after like months, I say 8 months, I believe it's actually 9 months of like intense fighting and just being there. Incredibly interesting, of course, here also is that you have Soviet settlers very, very soon arriving in East Prussia itself, who are themselves forced to go there. Like, they are being sent there by like a Stalinist dictatorship themselves. They are also very much fish out of water. They are not just there completely on their free will either. Yeah, you see that like the hunger and like disease are really becoming absolutely like widespread here. You see like famine breaking out. Like, we have, quite frankly, like not seen that before ever in East Prussia. Keep in mind, of course, like during the Second World War, why is the East Prussian agriculture staying at the high level that it does, it is quite frankly because it is completely buoyed by slave labor, right? You see that East Prussian agriculture, why is it so good? It's because the subsequent German governments, like whether it's a democratic government, a Nazi government, or a Reich government before that, they're pumping a lot of money in it. Like East Prussia has very sandy ground. It is absolutely not the best agricultural place in Europe. So the moment that the Red Army arrives, it doesn't feel the need to invest all that money. Like if you have Ukraine with its rich black soil, why bother with East Prussia, right? East Prussians see that very, very differently, of course. Like they don't see beyond East Prussia. They don't see that all throughout Eastern Europe, areas are in the grips of famine, very similar to, like whether it's Poland, Ukraine, like Belarus, everyone is starving and like suffering. But East Prussians just see that as a cynical Red Army behavior. So by the autumn, we already see cases of cannibalism, for example, being reported to the police. We have like research into like the wolf children. Like here, I apologize to Ruud. I should have put a nice picture of your work and not this work. But yes, of children roaming through East Prussia, like just hoping to survive, feeling not confident that they could do that in a city like Königsberg itself, which at this point is an absolute like barren wasteland. Try to make it to Lithuania, for example. So these narratives I'd like to incorporate in our understanding of the final war as well. Good. Then some conclusions, or let's say instead of conclusions, like this is where I'd like expect my research to go. So when we think about East Prussia, it's a province whose final years really mainly been examined through a military lens. Like whether that is German soldiers or Red Army soldiers, it's a military narrative. Like every point of these months has been dominated by a campaign of sorts. Right? I'm saying, no, let's just look at it month by month. So this is why I was almost aggressive in the fact that I want to structure it chronologically. Just because like the narrative otherwise is, it's very easy to fall into the trap of sticking to like this military narrative again. German population as a whole, I find just also does not have real agency. Where do you see them pop up? It's only when they subscribe to this idea of flight and expulsion that they pop up, but they have a voice beyond that, and that is a voice that I like to incorporate. So it's not with the knowledge of hindsight that I want to look at this, but like what is happening there at the day itself, like any given day, March 8th, 1945, like I want to know what is happening there. Do we have sources about that? Yes, you have police reports, we have like memoirs, we have like propaganda reports. We have actually quite a lot. It's just like the fact that we haven't used them is because of the reasons that I've discussed. Once again, I also think it's very, very important to keep in mind that this war of worldviews is still going. It goes until the very, very end. Does not stop just simply because the German soldier has arrived at the borders of their own country. Like, no, like Poles are continued to be targeted, Jews are continued to be targeted, like quite frankly, any given like minority group or however like racially inferior group is going to be targeted right up till the very end with the full knowledge of the German military, of the German population. It is not just some SS hardliners or something like this. Like, no, like you have a deeply complicit population, which is also one of the reasons that they are so eager to keep fighting, right? So, and then finally, like the purpose of this ongoing research is to tie the war and peace like much closer together and provide a much more multifaceted, as I hope I did in the last 45 minutes, a more holistic view, if you will, of the period between the summer of 1944 and the autumn of 1945. And with that, I thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Bastiaan, for this large perspective in 9 months and through the whole East Prussia. And we have still a little time, a little slot for some question and comments. And I want propose to collect some question and comments. And I think because of the So, and first was Jan Musekamp, and I want to ask you to say your name, to introduce yourself before you put your question.
Jan Musekamp. Thank you for this very rich presentation. And I mean, we chatted a little bit over coffee about the reaction of German people on your research, so I just wanted to know if you can get into more detail. So, is there any research done in Germany that is also highlighting the role of the German army after they reach the German borders? And then what is the reaction of, I mean, this very, very strong narrative of victimhood, which you basically destroy? So what is the reaction of the German public to your research?
Okay, I want to collect question. Yes, Andrew, and later Gerhard Knock.
Hello, I'm Andrew Tompkins. Thanks very much for a presentation that's very rich in terms of historiographic critique and particularly attentive to distortions of memory and remembrance. I wanted to ask, the question of gender came up several times, and you also described this as kind of the first region in which the German civilian population encountered the Red Army. I wonder, to what extent, when you say civilian, should I be thinking exclusively in terms of women? And what do you think your research contributes that is new or that changes existing narratives with regard to gender perspectives?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and can you hand over the microphone to...
My name is Gerhard Knock. Is it on?
Yes?
Yeah, you hear me? Okay, fine. First of all, I was wondering, you said that the brave women who took out their families out of Königsberg, etc., that it is totally under the radar. Do you mean German consciousness, society, or German historians or historians outside Germany? I was, at least from a German perspective, I cannot really understand it. I rather think, or I wanted to draw your attention to this rediscovery of the suffering of the expellees, of the Vertriebene after 2000 with Erika Steinbach, with great successful films as, what was the film, Flucht und Vertreibung or something, Maria Furtwängler.
A great many, yeah. No, a lot of these movies, yes. I understand your question,
The other point was, maybe you were wondering, why did the Soviet army actually storm Königsberg, and why didn't they just wait for another month? Well, I think you are perhaps looking for a document who proves why, or who tells us why they stormed, but I think perhaps enough to think about, let's say, Russian military culture or Russian political culture that says you cannot just wait. You don't take notice of the lives of your soldiers. You have enough of them. You have this horrible Russian word, "Людей у нас много." We have enough people. So you storm, otherwise you will get a ban from your bosses. I think that was my interpretation. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's start here. There we go. I hope this... Yeah, good. I have no intention of destroying a victim narrative, but I do want to challenge parts of it. I think, a lot of people tend to forget that like victimhood and being a perpetrator, they can live side by side. It's just something that we really struggle with as people. It's like, either they're victims or they're perpetrators. But you see, all throughout Eastern Europe, and this is not at all limited to Germans, there's a very large groups of people who one day are victims and the other day they're perpetrators. This can absolutely exist side by side. It's just something that we really struggle with to incorporate into a single narrative. So either you have to present yourself as this this one-dimensional victim. So also tying to your question, there is absolutely like a familiarity of this German victimhood, but it's a very one-dimensional victimhood that is existing among some very specific lines. And my intention is just to flesh that out a little bit. And when it comes to to women being tied to that, I think the reason that I think we should very clearly incorporate female voices in this is because within a great many narratives of war, it is the military that dominates that narrative and also gets to decide what we remember or not. So when I say we have forgotten these treks, for example, because the trek is a very well-established thing within German memory culture, of course. And this is not even me touching on the fact that the trek starts as something very positive, like in Nazi propaganda. It's the trek that goes and gives that send-off, and then it's a positive thing, and then halfway through the war it changes into this deeply negative thing, of course. But we have no familiarity with that in in Britain or in the United States. And of course, we, among experts and people who are interested, we say, oh, of course we know what a trek is, right? And of course we know, that a part of that is finding fodder for your horse, even though it is minus 15 degrees and the hay is frozen, and that is going to pose a challenge and so on. I think to a lot of that we understand that, right? But that is something that needs to be fleshed out. And what we have instead very often is the sense that it's the military narrative that prevails, where you have it's the putting civilians on ships and sending them to the West, for example. But here, once again, it's almost impossible to create a fully fleshed out narrative without immediately running to a narrative in which you have to incorporate the military. A woman cannot be a strong woman without the help of a man, a military man. And I think that is a very incomplete view. Right? You have, it's, even though I don't necessarily like the term, the hour of the women, the Stunde der Frauen, right? It is, it's something that we should keep in mind, that these treks, they are in their tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. They're traveling. They come with their specific issues. This is a deeply gender, to turn that to your question too. It's you have women very much taking charge, very often helped, for example, with French prisoners of war, who also are just not part of the way that we understand, by and large, this narrative. Have I touched on everything? Oh yes, no, sorry. The storming, right? I think you're right. I think it's going to be hard to find that smoking gun. But on the other hand, in Courland, they do sit back, for the final months. And that's only basically 100 miles up the, up the Baltics. So they can do it. That's basically, it's referred to as an open prisoner of war camp. It's basically a prisoner of war camp since, since autumn 1944. It's just that the German soldiers fighting there. Is that me? Probably. Sorry for that. Are not aware of it just yet, right? But also there, there are some offensives being launched, against the Courland, but there's no like decisive offensive there happening either. So, like this is where I have my doubts. My best guess, if you know, like this is as far as I got, is that if you are Stalin and you want to say that you deserve that ICE report that Königsberg is going to be, you know, like how do you pay for it? You have paid for it in blood. Like that is my best educated guess, which would align with, you know, like what you're thinking too. So that would be my best guess as of yet. So.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We have still time for 2 questions. Julia and Dario.
I'm not moving. It's open.
So I have a problem with this mic. You try it.
I think you cannot come too close to each other with the 2 mics.
But I think
I think everybody hears you.
Okay. No.
I think we can also leave it because we don't have a translation.
yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe speak like maybe just speak up.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
My name is Julia Whisky. I'm a visitor here.
Yeah, could you, I don't understand you, so your mic is clearly not working. Could you just speak a little bit louder?
I will just speak with
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Does it work?
Yeah.
So my name is Julia Whisky. I'm a visitor fellow here at the Institute. Thank you for
I don't know who like it's not me, right?
grand narrative that you presented here. I have 2 points, just some comments and questions. One of them, I was wondering to what extent you acknowledge the tragic fate of mixed families in Eastern Prussia.
Sorry, the fate of?
The
Mixed families.
Mixed families in East Prussia, Polish, German, also Kashubians.
Mm-hmm.
The tragedy of Kashubian population that were, first resettled and exterminated by Germans, the Nazis, and then they were resettled by Soviets, and also persecuted because Red Army couldn't distinguish them from Germans, Kashubians, Germans, also mixed families, Polish, German. So to what extent? To what extent you acknowledge the fate of those mixed populations in your research, or whether they are visible at least. This is the first point. The second point, at the very beginning of your presentation, I was astounded because you mentioned that 2 decades before the war, the Soviet Union has made serious strides towards civilized society. And that, to be honest, astonished me by the term civilized. And you were talking about efforts of civilization, and whether it's about Red Terror of 1920s, when tens of millions of people were eradicated, or Great Purge 1936 and 1938, or man-made famine in Ukraine 1931-33, or persecution of Jews in Soviet Union in 30s by Stalin, and all of that. So just please specify what are those civilized efforts, because I don't see them.
Okay,
thank you.
Christa Tenschel. My question is about the relation between the military and the civil administration, because you very much focused on what the military did and decided, and I would ask you to elaborate a little bit more about the role of the Gauleitung, especially Erich Koch and his administration or apparatus. Did it still function, or was it just dominated by the military, and how was the hierarchy in there, and what did Koch really do in this time? And the second question is about, you mentioned the tensions in the population about in the time when the Wehrmacht arrived and so on. But how many cases are documented about conflicts between the authorities and the civilians in the later times? Because, as we know, many more privileged functionaries, they already evacuated their families much earlier and so on, and this caused conflicts. And what do you know about this conflicts, whether some interventions of police or other troops or something?
Third question, Darius? What is the question? Okay.
I mean, these are very, very diverse.
Then,
Yeah?
then the third question goes.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
No. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for this lecture, also because it illustrates very well what we want to highlight in this series, namely that the end of the war is never a moment, but rather a long-lasting process. I was very much impressed by the small story about the zoo and the animals in the zoo, also because it shows very well the environmental consequences of the end of the war, or actually the battle. And I assume that not even one tree left in Königsberg, because they were used for heating. This is at least what we know from other Festung cities. But this brings me to the question about more general environmental consequences of 1944-1945 in East Prussia, also because East Prussia used to be a region that had a very strong identification with nature and landscape and
fishery.
How did this change during these months? Thank you.
Good. Well, let's start with like the civilizing, because I can understand like your hurt, right? And I agree with everything you say. Like let's get it out of the way. Like this is not me denying Holodomor. This is not me like anything like this. Like what I mean with like the civilizing mission that you see that like the different Soviet governments, if you will, are embarking on. It is very much for their own population. So you see that like the levels of education increase, like things like hooliganism, for example, are being like addressed. Like alcoholism is really being tackled, for example. Like our point of departure at this point, of course, is the Tsarist state, right? So like the fact that you are able to really like permanently do away with serfdom, for example, it's something that like Soviet officials like proud themselves with. Like what does this mean on the other hand? And here this is where we get to your part. It's like, yeah, you have to, if you are like the Soviets, you have to put your knife into something, like how are you going to slice up your society? And then you're of course going to see that very large groups, like as with the Tartars, for example, or with the Ingush, or like kulaks, or like whatever it's like, they are going to suffer. They are going to suffer dramatically. They are going to suffer in very, very high numbers. This is still like not to say like the violence that we see in 1945 should not just be attributed to some just purely to dictatorship. Like you have to factor in like the war itself too. Right, like the violence that you see engulfing East Prussia, like you cannot understand it by just looking at the Stalinist regime and saying the regime is evil because look what they did over the last 20 years. Like no, you have to factor in the fact that like you do see that the German soldier is like starving a village, is executing civilians, is like, and not just civilians but your sister. Right? Or like something like this, like the hatred that you're seeing, like at individual level for the individual Soviet, like should be at the very least, you cannot just take the war out and say Soviet regime is an evil regime, so on and so forth. It is, like, just one-dimensionally evil. Like no, like we have to look at like the war itself, and we have to keep that in mind to see how you go from like a violent dictatorship to what is like this is hyper-violence. Like this lies beyond what we are seeing like in the Soviet Union at any point in time, like in that respect, or at least that is where I'm coming from it. Then what were you asking? Oh yes, okay, yes. So when it comes to Koch, And when it comes to civilian and party organizations, right? Koch, it is like, well, this is, you know, like I feel very conflicted about saying this. So, because once again, I'm going to go in a very awkward narrative in where I actually have to stick up for, or like, you know, actually like come a little bit to the defense of Koch. And that is what I, both with the Red Army, run into, and what I run into when it comes to the party. And that is, you know, like he has extremely limited sources at his disposal, and you know, like he is being presented like once again as this like almost buffoonish, like ill-equipped person who punishes any sort of like defeatism as, you know, like as punishable with death. Like, well, beyond the fact that we have quite literally no sources indicating that Koch sentences anyone to death for defeatism, except maybe perhaps some of his own officials, but not like civilians. Like this is all the military who, you know, being in charge of the like of the defense, takes very rigorous calls to summarily execute German civilians. We have very often been extremely willing to tie that to Koch, right? Because it is the party who takes the propagandist lead, and I'm not taking away from anything of that, but it is the army who implements that vision. Like once again, like the army and the party are much closer connected than we want. Like we have created this antagonism between the army on the one hand and the party on the other hand. This is incredibly something that serves the army very, very well. Like in the 1950s, the army is incredibly willing to throw Koch under the bus, of course. Because who's going to stand up for Koch? No one, right? I already feel awkward about it, and it's 80 years after the fact, right? So like in the 1950s, like no one is going to say, hey, actually, you know, like Koch did what he had to do. Like was Koch extremely cowardice in his flight from the Friesenierung? Yeah, I think he is, right?
Very, very sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Our specialist on Erich Koch isn't today here.
Okay.
A wonderful battle.
No. So
sorry.
Yeah, no. So like he's an absolute like vile character, if you will. But on the other hand, yeah, like he is like how can I say this? Yeah, like it's going to like how about I get back to you? Like I have a good answer for you, and how about we discuss it during dinner, and then I can come up with a slightly more profound answer. What I can say is that a lot of the negativity that is heaped towards Koch is once again like tied to that victim narrative. Like Koch has to be the perpetrator. Like the person who is going to victimize is Prussians, right? So by all pointing to Koch, you can very quickly steer away from your role in in keeping that machinery going, right? So Koch has very, very limited sources at his disposal, is in theory put in charge of the evacuation of civilians, even though this comes to live with the Kriegsmarine. Wherever he makes tries, the army will immediately engage with that. Yeah. Anyways, there's an awful lot to unpack, but let's pick that up a little bit later. And then, oh yes,
Relevance and the environment.
Yeah. Yes, like the environment question. Actually, it's something that I've actively tried to incorporate, like the element of environment. Like what we have, for example, with this at some point in the second week of the Soviet offensive. Like so, this is around the 20th of January 1945. If von Lehndorff, like Dr. von Lehndorff, Hans Graf von Lehndorff, he wants to leave. He says to his father and his mother, "Let's go." And his mother and his brother are about to go. But his father, he says, like, "Look at all the deer. Like, there's so much red deer. It's all coming out of the woods. Like, we should start a hunting party today. This is so great, right?" But what is happening to the deer? It is very much what is happening all throughout Eastern Europe. It's like they're fleeing ahead of the artillery. for example, right? So, you do see a profound change in, like in nature, for example. The entire agriculture is basically like decimated. You have a lot of these horses, for example. I know that there are about, the closest that I have is 50,000 horses in this area. Because here you have to get on a boat, or you have to cross here, right? Here you cannot cross. So as German or East Prussian civilians, here you have to leave your horse, right? This entire place is like teeming with horses. These are now, in March 1945, they're all killed. They're put in salt so that they can survive into the coming period. Only a very few of them survive, like the best horses survive. What we see also, for example, that on occasion Poles that have been liberated, like the Red Army, on occasion just gives them a horse. Say like, okay, you go down, you have a horse, because it's very easy to give something that is not yours to begin with. So you say like, so horse by horse, it's just taken out of the East Prussian agriculture until you go from hundreds of thousands of horses to, quite frankly, almost no horse in East Prussia. That profoundly changes that. Then we also see, like during the German retreat, you have cows, for example, being brought in by the German military, because what we tend to forget is that they are actually in control of very, very large herds of cattle. They bring in mastitis, which is a quite hard disease that cows have, and I'm not a veterinarian, so I cannot say much more about it. I just only know that it's very serious. And this actually kills off a lot of larger cattle in the north, actually around the Memel area. As a result of that retreat, you see a complete transformation of, I wouldn't say especially the fauna, that is what I can say. Flora, I don't know, but I do know that a lot gets destroyed, for example, as a result of having to dig trenches through fields. Line after line after line after line. You incorporate lakes into your defenses, for example. If you have to dig a trench through a field, this also means that, if it's a farmer's field, you can no longer work those fields. Where is a regimental headquarters going to be, for example? It's in the one brick house in the region, which is, of course, like the main estate, like the main house on the estate, which are then going to be targeted by Soviet artillery. So, all of that contributes to a complete destruction of that area. And then there was another question. Oh, the Kashubians. Yes, yes, I do incorporate those. Yes, thank you. I do wish to do much more with that. The reason that, as of yet, I do not have as full of an understanding I want of it is, quite frankly, because I know that I'm going to find a lot of the answers in Andreas Kossert's work, who has done much more when it comes to the people of East Prussia living in the south, like the Masurians. Andreas Kossert has done it better than I will ever do it. So I have found some sources of Red Army soldiers, which should be treated with extreme care, I should immediately say, where they come across Masurians, and they are about to molest them, and then it is the moment that they say, I'm not German, I'm they say, Polka, Mazurka, and then people have to a Red Army political officer has to come in and explain actually that Masurians are actually Baltic peoples, Slavic peoples that are, out of the realm of, untouchable, if you will. This is a post-war account, so whether this is precisely true is up for debate. What we also have is we have a lot of East Prussians who are acting as if they are Polish. So we do have a lot of people who we see, during the siege, for example, who start to practice their Polish, who say like, no, I was here brought in, I got Volksdeutsch, but I'm really from, like from anywhere in Poland. So, which is something that you could convincingly do if you're in East Prussia. There is like the East Prussian-Polish border is a very permeable source, border. So there's a lot of migration, especially like seasonal work has already like taken place like before the arrival of the Nazis. Of course, there is like summer jobs have always been taken up by Polish farm hands. Then that becomes like slave labor, of course, after the Second World War. So they most definitely incorporate that in their thinking. And like when it comes to the Kashubians, that I actually don't know, but that is, I'm going to hide behind the fact that is Danzig and not East Prussia. So yes, that is, I can just say that's just too far west for me. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your rich answers about cows and horses and flora and fauna. We will speak later because I have some commentaries, but not for the whole public. So I'd like to thank you once more for your lecture. I thank the audience for the discussion and the contributions to the discussion. I would like to remind you of our next event, the Tuesday's lecture on the 7th of January. Our speaker is Benjamin Lahusen. He is a German legal scholar from Viadrina, and the topic is the administration of normality, German law and German society from 1943 to 48. And finally, I would like to wish you a happy and relaxing holiday season. Have a good start to the new year, and come to the German Historical Institute also in 25 as well. You are always welcome to our events and in our library. Thank you.